area that I wanted to draw attention to in the relationship between religion and politics, Christianity and politics in Australia recently, is in the area of policy. And we've already touched on that a little bit by talking about the things, the policy losses that Christian conservatives have had over things like abortion and voluntary assisted dying. But there's another interesting area of where the religion-state relationship has a big policy implication, and that is in the area of outsourcing of what were previously government services. So in one of the big kind of unsung or not very often sung effects of the neoliberal revolution in Australia has been handing over huge swathes of what were previously government activities to private agencies, and the majority of those private agencies are actually church ones. So back in 2015, the economist and also former SCMer, Paul Oslington, calculated that more than half of Australian welfare activities were being run by churches, and that proportion has only increased with the NDIS, with the expansion of aged care. And then another whole area that Paul didn't touch on in that analysis, of course, is private schools. And more than a third of Australian students attend private schools, and more than 90% of those schools are Christian of one sort or another. So from Federation until the late 1960s, the number of dollars spent on by governments on private schools in Australia was zero. And from the 1960s onwards, it's been expanding and expanding, and it's now in the billions. And we now have a situation where some Christian schools, religious schools, are receiving more public money than similarly ranked or similarly resourced public schools in the same area. And so what we've seen is a massive shift of public funding, public resources, from government activity to church activity, to the extent, and all this as the numbers of people who actually go to church falls and falls. So to the extent that, as Paul Oslington pointed out, very soon, if not already, most people's only contact with a church will actually be through encountering a church agency as a service provider, rather than through taking part in worship or having a conversation with somebody about a matter of faith. There are all kinds of sort of equity and other implications of that shift.